journey until we get to the proposal phase, and I'm super thankful to the community members and leaders who are here to speak with us and share history and insight.
What are the things that you're seeing, hearing, and feeling, however mundane, however, like we're going to see a pump station, we're going to see people's yards, and a lot of the people that are joining us either grew up or live here in this neighborhood today.
In 1831, there was a railroad built from the French Quarter out here to this section called Milneburg. It was the first venture out into what was, if you can read the caption, a cypress swamp, which is what this entire area was. If you wanted to know why this area flooded in Katrina, that's why. This is the London Avenue Canal, which was dug and appears on this 1878 map. The idea was to pump the water out to the lake so that this land here could be developed. This land here, which is where the star is, was reclaimed between 1936 and 1941 by the Works Progress Administration, and it became the area that we know as the lakefront today. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina pretty much wiped out the neighborhood, and so what you're seeing now is this was all wetlands.
Ms. Rosenberg laid it out pretty convincingly to us that at that time it was a middle-class neighborhood which consisted of a lot of retired folk and elderly folk. But what happened was, in this particular area, even though it was a swampy area, when I moved here in 1987, there was no need for flood insurance. Convincingly enough, when Katrina came, if you didn't have flood insurance, you suffered a traumatic loss because most of the stuff was evaluated by flood. Each neighborhood home you see on the way, in front of each home was a tree planted, either magnolia or crepe myrtles, which would absorb water, would provide us an opportunity to have some water reserved to keep the ground from drying. Post-Katrina, you will see that not many homes in this neighborhood now have trees in front of them. Just asphalt roads, which causes severe amount of soil erosion beneath the street doubles, and also along the sidewalk, and you'll see that as we go visit it, and you'll be able to put it in your mind. Imagine, if you would, this neighborhood with trees, and now I'm seeing it without trees, and what it would be like if we had trees to help us preserve some of this area.
Storm drain, it would go via small pipes that feed into bigger pipes down to drainage pump station number 4. So we're going to visit that. We can follow the path of water from here to there. The New Orleans Redevelopment Authority, after Katrina, was tasked with managing thousands of empty lots around the city. And so one of the things that they realized as the urban water plan was being developed, as there's this push to change our relationship to stormwater, Nora said, why don't we use all this vacant land to try to do something about it? And one of the things that we really need is space to hold water. And so what you see is these curb cuts. These were put in place so that water, instead of going to storm drain, goes instead through here and into this low spot. You can see how it's dug out to be lower than the surrounding neighborhood. And so this whole thing fills up like a bathtub. It goes, there are holes on this side, and it goes into, it connects back to the existing storm drain. So that's the basic function of it. You'll see cypress trees, which are native to Louisiana, and they really do a great job soaking up water. You'll see palmettos, you'll see irises, and you'll see these metal curly Q fence things. And they're there because this whole area is supposed to be filled with irises, because in natural settings they exist on the banks of waterways and water bodies. Lawnmowers aren't so fine-tuned in what they cut and don't cut, and so the irises were being chopped down over and over again. And so what you can see here is a little bit of adaptation where the city, its agencies, is figuring out, with this new kind of infrastructure, what does it take to keep it alive, to keep it functioning the way it's designed to. June, we had a meeting here, and it was for neighborhood residents. It was about the park design. One of the issues that came up over and over again, and that was a source of tension for neighborhood residents, that we tried to capture and find some way to resolve is that right now these parks that we see, they present in a certain way. They're large, grassy, open areas with beautiful oak trees. We had a number of residents say this is why we moved here, for this sort of pastoral quality. And then we also had residents who said, I grew up here and this used to be much more actively programmed. There were bathrooms and places and equipment and sports teams, and that's part of the history of this neighborhood.
So some of the confusion with residents was this a park or was this a playground? This was actually, you can see the old backstop over there, baseball backstop, basketball diamond, kids play areas. It was a playground. Of course, Katrina all had left. So it looked to some people like it was just an open park. Then what the kids go to get recreated and been out, you don't have a playground for them.
So if you look at the back of your handout here, you got some images of both this park, Fillmore Playground, as well as Gatto Playground where we started our day, and what the future designs for those are looking like right now with lots of input from the community. This playground, as you can see, is very dilapidated. The stairs are actually coming apart. It's not in good condition. One of the things that kids told us they really wanted when we did community activities with kids and had them draw kind of what they were interested in was they really wanted to get up. There's nowhere we can get up high and really see over things. And so we have kind of a tower playground that we've chosen for this site. Next to that is a set of shade structures that are shaped like umbrellas. So trying to kind of further the sort of water theme and thinking about how we can create something a little bit more playful. And then next to that is a half basketball court. Really thinking about having a safe place for kids to come, play basketball, recreate, have more of that playground characteristic back. We're also restoring and improving the track and widening it because a lot of people use the track still, even in its current condition. Around the edge in the top one, you can see these kind of like flowery areas. Those are bioswales where we're going to be absorbing water into the ground. Gatto has even sort of larger areas at the edges where they're going to be planted. So thinking about ways that we can kind of get that natural, sort of more contemplative feeling into some of the ways that art could be expressed at Gatto versus the kind of slightly more active, recreational feeling and then maybe community-oriented feeling into the way that this park gets expressed. One thing I will say is both parks have very active communities surrounding them. And obviously the neighborhood is here, but this park in particular, we know somebody comes and mows it like regularly from the communities. And so it'll be really important to keep that, mechanism, this kind of work and community input going as we think about what some of the art might look like in these areas as well.
Again, we're generally following the path of water. Imperceptibly, this land grades down towards Prentice, and there's massive culverts, big concrete canals that bring water from this entire neighborhood, and both sides of London Avenue Canal actually to that culvert and over to the pump station, which then picks up that water and dumps it into the canal.
Good to see that people are interested in finding out about how this drainage works here in the neighborhoods and really in the city as a whole. If you take a look right over here to your right, to my left, you can see where the water gets to the station. Okay, this is after it has fallen from the sky, made its way into the gutters and the streets, then eventually into the catch basins. From the catch basins, it travels in pipes and underground canals, and these are the two major underground canals right here that allow that water to flow into the station here. When these pumps get turned on, the water elevation here in this intake basin lowers. Okay, and then the water from all of these areas outside flow through these canals because gravity pulls it down to the lower spot. Okay, and so really, until you get to the pump station, the main driver for the water to get here is going to be gravity. And gravity works almost all the time. I can't remember a single time when it's ever failed. The only problems we have is when we can't keep the level low enough for gravity to do its job here. So if we get really heavy rains, the water's getting to the station faster than we can pump it out. And so rather than this basin here going down, the water level comes up. This pump station here serves about halfway between here and say Gentilly Boulevard and all the way to the lake on this side of the canal. And believe it or not, we also pump areas on the other side of this canal, and you'll see that when we start getting over to where the pumps are, because we have no pumps over there. Right. but you'll see a great big pipe. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. It is one of the only stations that we have that's not covered. And so all this equipment is on the outside. This apparatus that you see here with the chain and the bars and the screen and everything, this is to try to get any of the large debris that finds its way into the drainage system out of the canal before it gets to the pumps. The pump goes down into that water that you saw out there, okay? Once this pump is turned on and is primed, that water comes up through here. There's a big giant propeller. It turns, pulls that water through here, pumps it out here, and eventually out into, in this case, the London Avenue Canal. The London Avenue Canal is directly connected to the lake. So whatever we pump out of here goes into the lake. We do get a lot of debris though. Primarily what we get is trash. You'll see when we go in the back there, a lot of plastic bottles. Man, that's one of the difficult things for us to deal with because they get through the pump and in some cases they clear our system here in the back and then they get out into the lake. We really don't want that here in the city. We want to keep that lake clean. We also have another device, it's called a siphon, that takes water from the other side of the canal over the top of the canal and dumps it over here into this basin that these pumps also pump out as well. But the other part of this, I think, that everybody realizes is that we're not going to be able to pump our way out of the problems here in the city. And that's where green infrastructure comes in, and we have to be looking at, requiring businesses to new businesses, new developments to start handling their own stormwater, either through stormwater detention or retention areas, adding green space so that the ground can absorb some of that water instead of having it run off directly into the streets and into the storm sewers and end up here at the station very quickly. It costs us labor to clean it and then labor to dispose of it. Some of it makes its way out into the lake. There's nothing that we can do about that with the system that we presently have. We just can't capture it all. As you can see, it's a significant amount that comes in. If people would see, realize just how much debris we get at these stations and what it's composed of, they might be a little more careful about, the things that they discard out in the street.
The mouth of the delta has moved over time. So the Mississippi is bringing sediment from draining 2/3 of the continent all the way down into the Gulf of Mexico. Over the millennia, it kind of moved back and forth, almost like a garden hose spraying out. That sediment is what allowed the kind of rich life to exist here. Because you have fresh water from the river mixing with the salt water of the Gulf, so you get this gradient that's called an estuary. And thanks to that, we have amazing, seafood. And then the sediment itself adds to itself over time. So the delta is going to naturally sink. These soils are soft and fluffy, and over time, the weight of the soil on itself will compact, and that's just natural subsidence. But in order to live here, we really couldn't deal with this yearly flooding that was going to wipe out the structures that we put in place. So we leveed the river and locked the Mississippi River in place. That then had some consequences that followed that decision. It meant that we no longer got that annual pulse of sediment to add up onto the layer. So now we're subsiding, but we're not adding anything onto it. The lack of that process is actually, accumulated over time to contribute to our coastal land loss crisis. So Louisiana has lost over 2,000 square miles of land in the past century. Climate change is not helping things because we talked about sinking, but if the sea level is rising and you're sinking at the same time, that means you have one of the highest relative rates of sea level rise in the country going on here, globally also. The ecology of the area is, in many ways adapted to hurricanes. And that if you have healthy wetlands, they can rebound, from that.
But if the wetlands are starved, if they're not healthy, they're going to have a harder time rebounding, and they're not really serving the function of buffering. So we advocate for coastal restoration. We just, want to think about the concept holistically. We need this natural infrastructure as well as our human infrastructure, and our hurricane plans to exist here into the future.
This map tells the story. This is an elevation map for the city of New Orleans. The orange and yellow areas are the highest elevation, and the purple areas are the lowest elevation. These purple areas correspond to where that cypress swamp was that the neighborhood was built on. This is the reclaimed land, which is now the University of New Orleans, and you can see when they reclaimed it, they built it higher. This is the land across along the river. There were no levees initially, so when the river overflowed, it dumped sediment, and that made that area higher. And this thin area here is Bayou Gentilly, which ran through the city. It's also a higher area.
What are you doing at your house? Do you clean your gutters? Do you catch the water before it goes in the drain?
Like how this will affect kids 20 years from now, and we need to start thinking about that today and how scary that is.
Can we make designs, that are, that let us incorporate, going back to sitting along the edges of these canals?
I was interested in all the construction going on, and then cracked sidewalks and the contrast between those two things, the really new existing with the sidewalks that really kind of have the historical memory of what's actually happening in the land.
The size of those pipes, it's so incredible how it's kind of splintered into those little things that each one of us can do.
The introduction of kids playing in the community, and talked about how it wasn't that way before, so considering what made the neighborhood more inviting for kids to sort of exist in.
You see kids playing, they're just playing on grass, just think what their little minds could imagine, and the play would be enhanced if there were actually things out there.
We also talked about the canal and how to make the natural space seem closer, I think. Like we imagined what that would be like, and also some of the problems, like why it's scary to imagine that without a flood wall, and also why it might be useful to have it so you can see where the water is.
No one really addressed the plastic one, and it actually is the thing that I like stuck for me in the seeing that amount of traffic or plastic and thinking about what the community involvement is. And
one of the things that I guess struck me the most was the plastic, and that's the only thing that I wrote down.
We don't know how to get rid of, we don't deal with trash,
It was the first time I've ever been to a pumping station. And not everybody in this neighborhood would have that opportunity. So they wouldn't see the crisis with the plastic bottles. So it kind of ties into everyone here, pretty much all of these groups, I would say. Because then you would see the problem with the neighbors within the neighborhood, right? Was that the first time you had been to the pumping station? And right?